those large payoffs. So you see here, you have Kilburn on the left and Berni on the right. So we will get into our match here. And starting off, the Devotion deck on the play. Remember, both these are Elvish Mystic decks, so tempo, these early turns really do matter.
Yep.
And both are just going to start by trading temples, so no Elvish Mystics on either side. When you look at the mana accelerants, you have Caryatids and Mystics, so 7 mana creatures on Brad's side, and Berni has, I believe, 12 accelerants. He's on Caryatids, Mystics, and then Voyaging Satyrs as well.
But it looks like Robert, off of a mulligan to 6 here, does not have a mana accelerant on turn 1 or turn 2, so this is very good news for Brad.
Yeah, Brad actually the first one with a mana creature. That will be a Sylvan Caryatid on 2 for him. So you go back over to Berni. His first play of the game will be on turn 3, which is late for the deck, but still could be quick enough. Looks like he'll be going for something like Courser of Krufix here.
And Robert's just generic big creatures are pretty good against red-green aggro. There's no Hero's Downfall, there's no Abzan Charms in this deck. The removal is all red burn. So threats like Pelucranos, Big Genesis Hydra, Whisperwood Elemental, these are all just quality plays against Brad's deck.
So Courser will be the play from Berni. It'll show the top card of the deck, which is a Forest. Robert already making his land drop this turn. Won't be able to get that one for free, but may be able to get some additional ones. As you go back over to Brad, does have an answer for the Courser, but it is a pair of Wild Slashes.
Which still may be good enough.
It looks like it's going to be, this is the aggro side of his deck. It's going to be Goblin Rabblemaster for the turn for Kilburn. He's going to go ahead and play that. It will make a 1/1 and crash in, but with only 1 mana up, there's not too big of a chance that Robert won't just eat this.
Yeah, this is an easy block. Brad's still going to make him do it, but...
And Robert drawing the Forest for the turn. Top card deck is Eidolon of Blossoms, so no free cards just yet for Berni. He'll play the Forest out of hand, the one he drew for the turn, go back up to 20, and now start coming the large threats. It's 4 mana, and the first one will be Pelucranos World Eater. That's going to be a 5/5 on the board.
And this is the first big test for Brad, because this is a problem for him in the matchup, is just Robert's... We're not even talking about having a lot of mana. Just his big, doofy green dudes are pretty good here.
Yeah.
And Pelucranos is problematic. Brad's going to have to cobble together multiple spells or try to play through it. Neither is easy to do.
Well, we see that in cards like Siege Rhino as well. That 5th point of toughness can just be really strong here. And Brad's going to go ahead and use 2 kill spells, Stoke the Flames and Wild Slash in conjunction to take down Pelucranos. That is the Goblin that Rabblemaster made for the turn, so nothing will swing into that Courser. Yep. So Robert kind of helping to get himself back off that mulligan, as he did get a 2-for-1 just by casting Pelucranos.
And now it's drawn Eidolon, the Great Blossoms. I mean, it's an ugly play there for Brad, but he has to do it. Can't let Pelucranos go unchecked. And now the second one here from Robert is probably going to be a pretty big problem.
Yeah, in the screen red matchup, this is Robert's source of card advantage in a lot of ways. It seems that it's cards with 5 toughness, cards like Pelucranos, Genesis Hydra. It's really hard for Brad to get out of this with only 1 kill spell.
He does not have a lot of ways to trade profitably with these kind of cards. He can ignore them with flyers, or he can Crater's Claws in certain spots for enough to kill him. But by and large, these kind of threats are very problematic.
So back over to Kilburn. He did not hit a land last turn. And it looks like he's going to go ahead and make a second Goblin here. They will both swing with Rabblemaster. Or rather, he's going to go for another two-card play. It's going to be Stoke the Flames on Pelucranos and Wild Slash again. So it's the same 2-card combo. Brad able to kill 2 Pelucranos, but this is at the cost of 4 burn spells.
To reiterate, it's not pretty, but this is the kind of trade that Brad needs to do here.
Now, with 12 points of burn being targeted at 2 Pelucranos, at what point does Brad change gears and just start throwing this at Robert's face?
He would need to have something like Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker or Stormbreath Dragon, a recurring source of flying damage. If he has to only get through on the ground right now, which appears to be the case, he just has to kill these things. Robert's at 21. Pelucranos kills very quickly. And if he goes monstrous with it, we're looking at, right now a 7/7, and the Rabblemaster's probably dead. That's not a race that Brad can win even with 12 points of burn in his hand.
All right, Robert drawing Voyaging Satyr for the turn. That Courser has yet to produce on free cards for Robert. But one thing that Robert's hand does have is it sure has a bunch of Pelucranos. And if you're Brad, this is unexpected. So he's seen Robert's draws. Robert hasn't actually drawn a Pelucranos yet, which means Robert's opening hand was something along the lines of 3 lands, a Courser, and 3 Pelucranoses.
I mean, not a bad mulligan, but Robert started off with no mana acceleration, so his hand has to have something in it.
Another Caryatid for Brad. He still doesn't have the land. I'd be amazed if he can kill a 3rd one of these.
Well, it depends. If he makes a Goblin here with a Roundmaster and attacks, all he needs is Stoke the Flames to be able to kill the Pelucranos. I guess he's already used 2, but not impossible.
Yeah, and I think at this point he's just going to go aggressive. Makes that 3rd Goblin token and swings all 3. This is Goblin Rabblemaster. He will trigger up to a 5/2 and 2 Goblins. Robert's going to go ahead and block Pelucranos onto a Goblin and Courser of Krufix, offering a trade with Rabblemaster. And looks like that's just what's going to happen. Robert takes 2, goes to 19. Rabblemaster and Courser hit the graveyard along with one of the Goblin tokens.
Now, if Brad was going to make that attack, I think I would have preferred to not play the Caryatid pre-combat because he still could have represented Stoke the Flames. And it's possible that Robert's not willing to put the Pelucranos in front of one of the tokens if that's the case.
Now, Robert's draw for the turn is Sylvan Caryatid. Now he goes on the offensive. This is Pelucranos. It will go ahead and swing for 5. Brad down to 15, and Robert will develop his mana farther.
Now, this is a spot if Brad has one of his big flyers, Sarkhan or Stormbreath Dragon, he's right in this game.
Yeah, maybe he can even race.
Yeah. He's got a lot of chump blockers. I mean, some of them are going to die next turn, most likely to the Pelucranos, but he's got 2 copies of Sylvan Caryatid. Those are some effective blockers, so ideally it would be Stormbreath Dragon, but even Sarkhan would be pretty solid here.
We'll see if he can get one of those. It looks like he's got another Stoke the Flames, so it's going to start by... And this, it's going to be Stoke the Flames and Wild Slash for a 3rd time on Pelucranos.
This is really good news, and I think there's a Sarkhan in Brad's hand, which means he's got a nice sea of chump blockers here to work with. And if that's the case, he might even be able to race this Whisperwood Elemental.
Yeah, so Robert with another follow-up. This is Whisperwood Elemental. It'll manifest on the end step. That makes a 2/2 colorless creature. Yeah, you're right. Brad's going to need another kill spell. He is almost out of cards like Stoke the Flames.
Well, Sarkhan, if that is in his hand, can just shoot down the Whisperwood Elemental as the first order of business. And he's got 2 chump blockers against 2 eligible attackers next turn, so there's no immediate risk of the Sarkhan dying. So we shall see.
It does look that way. It's going for 5 mana, and yeah, that is Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker. And he's going to actually go on the attack. It's going to turn into a 4/4 flyer. It'll fly over, putting Berni down to 15. So this is really a strategic transition from Brad. So he has cast 18 points of burn this game, and 18 of it has gone at Pelucranos's. But rather than continuing this all my burn going at your creature strategy, Brad has changed modes and is now going at Robert's face with Sarkhan.
It's a very aggressive line. I have to imagine that it indicates that something like Crater's Claws or perhaps the last Stoke is in his hand. It was pretty attractive in that spot, I think, to
kill the Elemental.
Just get rid of Whisperwood Elemental because Robert wasn't in a position to kill Sarkhan on the way back. It's not like this plussing of Sarkhan is done with protecting Sarkhan in mind.
Well, Robert will accept the terms of the race here. He's going to go ahead and swing with Whisperwood Elemental and the Manifest. Brad puts a 1/1 in front of the Whisperwood, lets the Manifest hit Sarkhan, but it turns out the Manifest is a Boon Satyr. And if you want to talk about drawing multiples of cards, Brad has drawn 3 Stokes and 3 Wild Slashes, but that's nothing to the 4th Pelucranos now being played by Robert.
Right. And actually, given the state of affairs here, Brad is well served going on the offensive with Sarkhan because trying to hold down the ground would not even be a viable option at this point. Brad has to damage race because playing the control game does not work anymore.
And actually turns out that those creatures weren't even going at Sarkhan. That Boon Satyr, that went 4 damage right to Brad. And yeah, flyers here are looking pretty decent. And here's Stormbreath Dragon from Kilburn. It's going to join Sarkhan. That is 8 damage across. Berni will go down to 7. Brad just needs to survive for 1 more turn, but that's going to be a pretty tough thing to do here. There's a lot of power on Berni's side of the board.
Well, I think just Pelucranos shooting down the Goblin token is enough here for Robert to attack for lethal.
That should be it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Brad's tapped out.
Caryatid goes in front of Pelucranos and the Voyaging Satyr, the Manifest token, and 2 4 power creatures
is exactly 11
for Xaxes.
I think Berni's seeing that exactly. So Pelucranos monster uses its monstrosity ability. It eats the Goblin token. Here's a swing. It's a 7/7, a 4/4, a 4/2, a 1/2, a 2/2. Brad has 1 blocker. It's that Hexproof Sylvan Caryatid. If it goes in front of Pelucranos, that's 4/4, 1 and 2, which conveniently adds up to the number next to Brad's name. That's 11. And we have it. Game 1 goes over to Robert Berni.
And you can see the last card in Brad's hand there was Crater's Claws. He transitioned to a damage race because he thought he was going to be able to close the game out pretty quickly. And in fact, he was. He had lethal next turn, even if Robert killed some of his creatures. Just Robert, with a great management of the damage race, ignored Sarkin and was able to push across exact lethal the turn before he was about to die.
You know, it's really one of those interesting games, too, because you have to think if Brad somehow, I mean, this is something Red-Green doesn't get to do, had a chance to ever look at Robert's hand during that game and see, hey, he has 3 Pelucranoses, I think Brad approaches the game entirely differently and just says, okay, well, now my burn is going to go at Robert, because killing his Pelucranos just turns on more cards in his hand.
Well, the problem that I had with Brad, I thought Brad actually played a pretty tight game there. I think he did a good job managing his resources and transitioning to the damage race when he did, I think was appropriate. The problem was he was dead on board that turn. So either the Sarkin had to be activated or the Stormbreath Dragon had to be left on defense. He needed to do one of those 2 things.
Right.
Or another alternative line of play, I think, is that he could have just cast Crater's Claws for some amount of damage at Robert, left up 2 Caryatids to block, and then try to finish off the game with Sarkin next turn. So there's a couple different lines of play available to Brad. I think there was some mismanagement on that last turn. But up until that point, I think he played a really solid game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I really like the way Brad played it. It's if in a perfect world, I think you can go with a different line, but it's really hard to know that.
Correct.
And turns out for Robert, even though aren't always this big mana devotion deck, but if you just want to play fair, 4 Pelucranoses in this matchup, that is a great recipe for winning.
Against a player that's not packing black, doesn't have things like Hero's Downfall, that's going to be a winning recipe. Brad he actually had pretty reasonable tools to handle the first 3 copies, but the 4th one did him in.
All right, well, looking over to the sideboards, we'll go first over to Robert Berni and his green-red devotion deck. We saw just how good these large threats can be in the mashup, so we go to his sideboard and look at things that he can do. Copies of cards like Nissa Worldwaker, Genesis Hydra, Arbor Colossus all seem pretty good in this matchup, especially when you look at the fact that he needs to stop cards like Stormbreath Dragon or Sarkon the Dragon Speaker.
Yeah, Genesis Hydra, Arbor Colossus. He has 2 copies of Hornet Nest. He's got a Xenagos. I actually think Xenagos is kind of poor in the matchup because Brad brings a little bit too much flying to the table. Cetessan Tactics, Nylea Disciple, and Nissa are all marginal options that may or may not come in, but I really like Genesis Hydra, Arbor Colossus, and Hornet Nest.
Well, yeah, this is Xenagos. This is the God Xenagos, not the Planeswalker Xenagos.
Oh,
in his
excuse
sideboard.
me. Oh, God, I just assumed that it was the Planeswalker.
Right, I mean, me too.
Oh, no, Xenagos is great in this matchup. I think it's a pure damage race, and Xenagos is a ton of damage, so that one's coming in for sure.
So if we're in a pure damage race, there's some cards that he has, like Nylea's Disciple, which is a great life gainer, or cards like Cetessan Tactics to deal with mana creatures. How do you feel about any of those in this matchup?
I think they're a little fidgety, and Brad's probably bringing in, if he doesn't already have a lot of removal, he's probably bringing quite a bit more. So I think Cetessan Tactics is a little marginal. I think it's only good in matchups where my mana creatures are up against your mana creatures, and my mana creatures are uncontested, and that's not going to be happening.
Do you have interest in something like Nylea's Disciple? We could
a little
see boards
bit,
there.
Yeah. I think so. It's a damage race again, and it's a pretty good answer. Not a direct answer to Flyers, but it's kind of an answer to Flyers.
Yeah, however, though, it is a 3/3, which means it dies to, well, one of the weapons I expect Brad to be using.
Yep. 4 Mystical Hydra, 4 Anger of the God, 3 Pelucranos, 3 Destructive Revelry, 1 Whispered Elemental. Like the 4 Angers, like the 3 copies of Pelucranos, Whisperwood, I could take it or leave it.
Yeah, so Whisperwood Elemental looked really good on Robert's side of the board, but it's not exactly what Brad wants to be doing here.
I think it's just too slow for this matchup. I think it's very good for matchups like Abzan and control matchups in general, but here I think that's just playing Robert's game.
We will see what they do. Right now, Berni up a game. So as we go over to game 2, Brad Kilburn on the play. Berni looking like he will be taking a mulligan to 6. So players currently getting ready for game 2. This is round 10. We will be covering rounds 10 through 15 of the Swiss, after which we will cut these 74 players down to the final 8, where they play a single elimination in our top 8 as they get ready here for our standard open. One thing we've been talking about on camera, this started about half a year ago, is Star City Games Game Night. You see we wear these pins on our jacket. These are the rat pins. So what are these and how do you get them? Well, that is StarCityGames.com Game Night. You, at any of your stores around the country, can make any of your tournaments a Star City Game Night. Just get in touch with us at StarCityGames.com/Game Night. And what does that mean? That means the players will receive these commemorative pins and special tokens as prizes. For March, those prizes, the tokens and pins, are the adorable rat you see here, and as we've been doing these each month, they just continue to get adorable. And next month's are probably one of the best ones we've had yet. It is adorable. This is not the first time we've seen it this weekend, but just still keeps getting better.
It's still awesome.
Kitten token if you want your cat creatures.
Look how big its eyes are. The world is such a wondrous place. You know? How great is that? StarCityGames.com/game night or contact your Star City Games organized play representative.
All right. Well, game 2 underway. This time, both players out of the gates with basic forests into Elvish Mystics. We saw them trade temples last turn. Well, this game's going to be a little more high octane. Brad, with that turn 2, well, it's Courser of Krufix. For Robert, I mean, it's a dodge that it wasn't the turn 2 Rabble Master, right?
That's the type of draw that can put Robert on some really early pressure and make it harder for him to get to his late game.
Yeah, Robert, he'll match on his own. This is a Courser of Krufix on his side.
So right now, it looks like these players are doing the same thing, and in fact, that they have thus far done the same thing. This opening is much more powerful for Robert than it is for Brad, because it's imperative for Brad to get on the offensive. He plays this waiting game. Robert's got so many more powerful tools. You can see Whisperwood Elemental on top of the deck.
Yeah, both players with 5 drops that they hope to hit on turn 4. And as far as Brad, though, in the aggressive game, he has a Stormbreath Dragon in wait. That could be pretty decent here. He spends the turn casting Stoke the Flames on Bernie's copy of Courser of Krufix. And they'll pass back over to Bernie, and this may be the World Eater again, but no, it's mana. Bernie with both Sylvan Caryatid and a Voyaging Satyr for the turn.
And this is another lesson of why it's important for Brad to have some of his flyers, because Robert's deck is very effective at gumming up the ground.
Now, one thing I want to point there, a lot of times you'll see players in Brad's situation wait on that Stoke the Flames until Bernie's draw step so he can gain information on Bernie's next draw before stoking. But I like that Brad didn't do that because of the possibility that Robert plays a card like Cetessan Tactics. He really doesn't want to not have that Stoke work.
He also just wants to hit for 2 that turn, and getting the blocker out of the way allows him to hit for 2.
Yeah,
That's
he
a
did
big part of
put
it too.
Bernie down to 18.
Yep.
Brad does not have the Stormbreath next turn. He had the land, but it was a temple. Plays that, gains a life, no plays, passes back. But what he does have is a second Stormbreath on top of his deck. And this has got to be a concern for Bernie.
It is one of the best ways for Brad's deck to beat Whisperwood Elemental is just fly over it and try to end the game before Robert's able to do too much damage with it.
Yeah, 4, then 8, then 8. That's enough to end the game. And those look to be the attacks on the next 3 turns from Brad. And Whisperwood Elemental may not be able to race that. Bernie will want something like Arbor Colossus or Pelucranos to be able to deal with that.
It's very challenging.
With Voyaging Satyr and this Nykthos, though, Bernie has a potential, if he has a large card, Genesis Hydra, Arbor Colossus, he can make a ton of mana here.
And it looks like the Arbor Colossus is in his hand right now, which is just ideal for Robert. It's probably his best sideboard card in the matchup.
Absolutely.
We saw how hard it was for Brad to kill something like Pelucranos. This is even bigger. And once Robert untaps with mana available, Brad can't even deploy one of his flyers because the monster just knocks it right out.
And Robert will spend his turn making Arbor Colossus. Remember, this 6/6 reach does a great job against the Stormbreath Dragons in multiples that he knows Brad is sitting on.
Yep. I mean, this really highlights just the challenge of the matchup here from Brad's side. Brad's had some pretty solid draws here, games 1 and games 2. He's got, I believe, 2 copies of Stormbreath Dragon ready to go right now.
Yep.
And Robert has, in fact, mulliganed both games, and it never felt like Brad got much of a foothold in either game.
Yeah, he does have 2 Stormbreaths and a Crater's Claws in hand. We see Brad here going to spend the turn making a Stormbreath Dragon, but it can't attack, and really, it stands in danger of Arbor Colossus just shooting it down.
I think that's and I think that Robert's just going to, I would imagine, just shoot down Stormbreath Dragon and start going on the offensive.
Well, he has so much mana this turn that one of the reasons Arbor Colossus sees a lot of play in these devotion decks is it has 3 green mana symbols in its cost. Nykthos is tapping for 6 right now. So Robert on the board, he has 12 mana just off these lands and creatures.
Yep.
You see that? Nykthos will go ahead and make 6 here.
I think Robert wants to go monsters in this turn in part because if he does other things with his mana, there is a risk that Brad is able to cobble together 2 burn spells and take care of the Arbor Colossus. And given that Stormbreath Dragon's in play and there's another one coming, I don't think that Robert wants to take that risk.
Yeah, and this is the trick you see a lot of times with Voyaging Satyr. So he tapped the Nykthos to make 6 green, cast Whisperwood Elemental, floats 1 green, but now he gets to untap the Nykthos. So 2nd green, and now when he puts in mana, because he's played Whisperwood off the first set of mana, he has 8 devotion. So he has 8 green mana right now.
Yep.
And 9 if he taps his last land. So spend 6 of it to make the Arbor Colossus monstrous. It goes from a 3/6/6 into a 9/9, and it shoots down Stormbreath Dragon. And you're right, Brad, turn 2 is Courser, turn 3 Stoke the Flames, and then 2 Stormbreaths, and it still feels like he's just miles behind right now.
Yeah, this is really a clinic right now from Robert in the matchup.
The 9/9 Arbor Colossus comes crashing through. Brad goes down to 12, and we see the Genesis Hydra on top of the deck. For Berni, it is manifested at least, so it's not going to become huge.
Well, bad news is looming on the top of Robert's deck there for Brad. Arguably worse than the Genesis Hydra even is Nylea's Disciple, which ruins any hope that Brad has of racing at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are 10 devotion to green when he plays this. This will be a gain 12 for Robert. Pretty favorable against cards like Crater's Claws.
Yeah.
Robert's going to go ahead and scry. He scries a Wild Slash, finds a Wild Slash. But the red-green aggro deck just doesn't, I mean, Arbor Colossus, it doesn't have ways to answer a 9/9.
No.
It doesn't have Death Touch, I don't believe. It doesn't have black kill spells. You know, it kills with damage, and this is a 9/9 is just very huge.
I mean, sometimes you see things like Harnessed by Force hanging out in sideboards to try to cheat, but the problem is that the green devotion decks usually have just some random chump blockers left over in the spots where they have a big creature that I always assumed initially that I would enjoy threatened effects against green devotion. I used to side them in earlier on in standard seasons, you know, last year when Theros was the most recent set. And then there was too many spots where I would take their big thing, but there'd be a carry added back on defense and they just chump blocked and that was it. So
yeah, sometimes the threat active treason effect of the format does grant trample, in which case you can use it, but yeah, I mean, it's really hard to find a situation where green won't have a chump blocker.
Yeah, you had to be really killing every mana creature they bring to the table, so they're in spots where they just have to tap out for Pelucranos, tap out for Arbor Colossus. But if any of their mana creatures go unchecked, it's very hard for those effects to be good.
Yeah, and Brad, you see playing great fair magic with Shaman of the Great Hunt, and then of Crater's Claws for that manifest token. But it just, there's so much going on here for Berni. Gonna go and tap. This is now devotion of 10. And he's gonna start with Hornet's Nest and Nylea's Disciple. That's a gain of 13. Berni should go to 31 off this.
And I manifested Pelucranos waiting, so that's not a bad turn.
Not at all. Not to mention, he can manifest this Pelucranos, and thanks to Voyaging Satyr, he actually can, on end step, use Voyaging Satyr to untap the Nykthos.
It's got two mana creatures.
Two mana creatures. He can flip over Pelucranos and Monstrosity it for a significant, I think he can Monstrosity it for 3 the same turn.
Yep. Whisperwood Elemental on the top now, so just another day at the office for Robert Berni and his red-green devotion deck.
These devotion decks do such a great job of scaling with mana. They seem, the more mana they make, the more things they can do. He just doesn't seem to run out of more action. And for Brad, he goes, so he's at 13, had to chump block that 9/9 this turn. It looks like it is. Brad looks at the board, says, there's no coming back from this. And 2-0, Robert Berni is your winner.
Not much that Brad can do about that matchup there. You know, Robert mulliganed both games. Brad's draws were solid. He had a reasonable curve backed up by removal and flyers. And Robert ran wild over him on game 2, and game 1 was a pretty close affair. But Robert mulliganed with no mana acceleration, and it was still ultimately a game Robert won. Yeah, and if you look at it, if you on the coverage yesterday, we saw a lot of green devotion as well, and it was 3-0 or I believe 4-0 on camera. I mean, these green devotion decks just aren't losing right now. No, they've been very, very impressive. And it's interesting to see Robert stick to his guns here with the red splash, since green-white was so impressive in Miami last week, but Robert basically playing the same deck that he used to win the Open in Houston last month and putting up great results.
All right.